telling you,
Freudian.
we're going to talk about Richard Dawkins, though. Stephen Hawking is speaking here. You know, that's quickly mentioned. Stephen Hawking is speaking at the first Linus Pauling Memorial Lecture. Except, you know, what's really bizarre is that the lecture is being delivered at the Child Center at the University of Portland, which is a Catholic university, and of course Pauling was an atheist through and through.
Absolutely.
And here he is, the memorial lectures is being given at a Catholic university. If Linus Pauling was alive, he'd be turning in his grave, right? So...
It always reminds me of Thomas Jefferson, you know, the person who was really against the paper money and then putting him on a $2 bill.
Yeah. But no, we're going to talk about Richard Dawkins and what they bill him as an ultra-Darwinist, but you know, that's kind of like...
Is that a politically correct way of saying atheist? I don't know.
I mean, that's pretty like, it's, you know, if you're ultra-Darwinist, you're way out in left field. No, you got your feet firmly planted in reality. It's everybody else that's way out in left and right field. And Dawkins is really right on the money. He's written a number of books. Two of the most well-known are The Selfish Gene, and the other one is The Blind Watchmaker.
I've heard of The Blind Watchmaker. I have not read it.
Now, this isn't the same Dawkins that used to play center for Philadelphia, is it?
No.
That's Darryl.
I don't know.
No, that was Steve Hawkins.
Yeah, Steve Hawkins, yeah. No, this Richard Dawkins is a zoologist, and he's now currently a, what is his position? He's at the University of Oxford, and he's a lecturer in animal studies or something like that. But anyway, he's written several books, and The Blind Watchmaker, to me, was a very profound book. It kind of altered somewhat of the way I saw things, and it helped me understand the importance of Darwinism and how it kind of explains some of the great mysteries of life that religion used to explain, however inadequately it tried to do so.
And you had a chance to talk to him
privately?
Well,
yeah, he came to Portland and he presented a lecture to the, it's called Science on the Edge, and it's presented by the Institute for Science, Engineering, and Public Policy, and it was at the Schnitzer, and it was fairly well attended. It was about 3/4 full, and he came and he talked for about an hour and a half or so, and it was about, his got a new, its concept is that the real survival mechanism is DNA. DNA is the fundamental component of all living things. And it is the survival of DNA is what is important. And the DNA just manufactures these shells, which we call our bodies, in order to assure its survival. Now, it's not doing this consciously or anything like that.
Right.
But what we're doing, we are just a package of material to ensure the survival of DNA. And so we're being used by a simple, well, it's not simple, by a DNA molecule for its survival. And the ability for one DNA to cooperate with another DNA to form these complex entities, which we call mammals and plants and all this kind of stuff, is just their way of packaging themselves to survive.
Now, as I understand it, DNA is in every living thing on Earth. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the fundamental component of DNA. What it is, it's a self-replicating molecule. Now, what he was pointing out that is on other planets and other solar systems and, you know, in other galaxies, there could be life there too, but it may not be based on DNA.
We've had this conversation, and who's to say we'd even be able to recognize it?
Exactly. That's what he points. He says you may even go there, you may not even recognize the life.
I don't plan on going there.
Yeah, so, you know, we probably won't. But the point is, what he likes to make the point, and when we show this little interview I did with him, is that even though the form of life on another planet in another galaxy may be fundamentally different than us, the evolutionary concepts as put forth by Darwin will more than likely apply there just as well as they apply here.
Well, I should think that we'd be able to recognize advanced forms of life no matter what they look like. For one thing, they'd have to be mobile, wouldn't they?
No, we have life on this planet that's not mobile.
Yeah, but it's not advanced life. It's vegetables.
It doesn't matter. We were talking about life, period. So the life on another planet may not be, you know, walking, talking, intelligent life.
Okay, all right.
You know,
all right.
In fact, the chances are if we ever do find life on another planet, it probably will not be intelligent life. I mean, there's no doubt there's intelligent life somewhere else in the universe, but the chance of even stumbling on life anywhere seems to be fairly remote. I mean, it's just not
I've heard it said that if we did find life on another planet, that it would probably be advanced from ours for the simple reason that Earth is not that old, that there are other parts of the universe that are much older.
That's true, and there's other parts that are younger too, so who knows? The chances are, though, that as he pointed out, the chances are we're not going to find life because it's not going to happen very often. It's going to happen, but to be able to find that one little planet on that one star in that one galaxy out of billions and hundreds of billions of galaxies, it's just not very likely.
Not only that, but the distances are so great.
The distances are great, right? Right now we're still having difficulty.
Yeah.
We assume there are planets going around other stars. We have just in the last year or two, we've begun to actually make some physical measurements that will prove that in fact planets are out there going around other stars. We haven't known it for any proof of it until just lately.
Right. I always think about it this way. We have planets that are 1 million light years away. So we send a radio message up that says, we live down here on Earth, hello.
Right.
Takes 1 million years to get there. They
Right.
decode it, send back a message. So 2 million years later here on Earth, we get, hi.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, it's just, that, the vastness of space is so incredible, and our time span on Earth is so short compared to that the chances of us making contact with an alien being is just about infinitesimal.
He spoke a little bit about this favorite of the Christians, the mathematical chances of something happening.
Well, this is what one of the things he gets into in The Blind Watchmaker. It's a really great argument for why you don't need to have special creation, and that has to do how did the first self-replicating molecule came to be. That's the tricky thing. Once you get a self-replicating molecule that can reproduce itself, the forces of evolution just take over, and you get going.
Right.
But getting that first one is just pure random chance. And of course, what you point out is that you can calculate. You've got the sea of chemicals in the early Earth, and the temperature and the weird atmosphere and the electrical storms and stuff. So you get all this thing going on. But you can calculate the chances of a self-replicating molecule just spontaneously forming. And for those of you who don't recognize, self-replicating molecules mean that ones that can take things out of the environment and produce another molecule that looks just like itself. Anyway, the chance of it happening are really, really slim. You can calculate it, and it's not very likely that's going to happen. But he points out is that we hit in our own galaxy, there's hundreds of billions, if not trillions of stars, and there's hundreds of billions of other galaxies out there, each having hundreds of billions of stars, and they all have, a lot of them have planets, and some of those planets are going to have atmospheres like we had, and the same thing going on. So we've had our atmosphere going on here for a couple billion years before anything happened. You've got hundreds of millions or billions of other planets out there with the same thing going on. When you got all that going on, then in fact it's mathematically probable that a self-replicating molecule is going to occur. In fact, it's mathematically probable that it's going to occur more than once. And so one of the times that it occurred, it happened on the planet Earth. And once it happened, evolution takes over.
And when you think of it that way, it's mathematically probable that anything would happen somewhere.
No.
I mean, that anything supposedly, when you say billions of...
No, because you say anything can happen, then I guess a supernatural force can happen.
No, well,
You see,
all right, I'm not going all the way. I'm not
anything
going all the way.
can
Most things will have occurred someplace.
If it's
Anything possible.
Anything
Right.
that's possible within the realm of the physical laws that govern how the universe moves, yeah, that could happen. But if it's not, can't be.
Right.
And so
right.
Given an infinite number of planets and an
not
infinite
infinite
amount of
number.
time, well, practically, it's a certainty it's going to happen, and we don't know if it ever happened anywhere else.
But probably
We don't
did.
know.
But
we
it may
don't
have.
know. We don't know,
Yeah.
but the chances are it has.
Now you have a film, and we better roll it before
Yeah.
we run out of time.
Right. This is after the lecture, I was able to talk to Richard Dawkins, and he agreed to a short interview the next day. So without any further ado, let's see my short interview with Richard Dawkins. Hi, with me today is Dr. Richard Dawkins, author of The Selfish Gene, the revolutionary book, as far as I'm concerned, The Blind Watchmaker, and his newest book, Climbing
Mount Improbable.
Mount Improbable. I have a couple questions I've always, ever since I read the book, I've always wanted to ask you, and they're kind of grand in the scope of things, not particularly specific. In your book, The Blind Watchmaker, I believe that you made the argument that, and last night at the Civic, I believe you made the argument that the principles of evolution apply everywhere in the universe. In other words, the laws of thermodynamics apply on a planet 100 billion light years away from the Earth as well as they apply on Earth. The principles of evolution apply on that planet as much as they would do on Earth. Is that a...
It's a less strong claim than for the laws of thermodynamics. I think for the laws of thermodynamics we more or less know that they apply everywhere in the universe. The laws of Darwinian evolution, for a start, we don't know if there's life anywhere else in the universe. There may not be. It is actually seriously possible that we may be alone in the universe. Assuming that there is other life in the universe, and I think most people think that there is, then my conjecture is that however alien and different it may be in detail, the creatures may be so different from us that we may hardly recognize them as living at all. But if they have the property of organized complexity and apparent design, adaptive complexity, then I believe that something equivalent to Darwinian natural selection, gradual evolution by Darwinian natural selection, that's the non-random survival of randomly varying hereditary elements, will turn out to be why it's there. All life in the universe, my guess is, will have evolved by some equivalent to Darwinism.
Okay, now, also from reading your book, The Blind Watchmaker, I kind of picked up the idea that the mechanisms of evolution not only apply to the origin of the species, our DNA survival, but in a way apply to everything in the universe, from quarks to galaxies.
I would prefer not to say that. I certainly haven't said that in any of my books, and I would be reluctant to say that. I think there's something very special happens in the universe when a self-replicating entity, which DNA is probably not the only one, but DNA is the self-replicating entity that we know. When that comes into existence, then there's a whole new game starts. Before that, you have just physics and chemistry. You have molecules bumping around, forming new molecules according to the ordinary laws of chemistry. Once by those ordinary laws of chemistry, a molecule springs into existence which is self-replicating, then immediately you have the possibility for Darwinism, for natural selection to occur. And then you have this extraordinary process which we only know of on this planet, but may exist elsewhere, whereby things start to get more complicated and start to look as though they've been really designed for a purpose. And if you look carefully at what that purpose is, it turns out to be to replicate, to pass on, to propagate that very same DNA or whatever it might be.
Well, now, people will sometimes look at the physical universe and say it looks like it was designed. The planets, they say they try to cite incorrectly the similarities between the atom and the solar system and this kind of stuff. But isn't the fact that a solar system survives kind of based on has properties that will ensure its survival versus another solar system that is unstable and passes
So you're
out?
trying to make a kind of Darwinian view of solar systems.
Of how,
Yeah.
how things
Well,
survive.
in a way, but let me make a distinction then between what you could call one-off selection, single-generation selection, and cumulative multi-generation selection. A solar system survives because we'll say a planet orbiting a star will orbit the star at a particular distance, which is the right distance for that planet and that star. That's the crucial distance. If it was orbiting faster, it would whiz off into deep space. If it was orbiting slower, it would spiral into the star. So there is a kind of selection of planets to be orbiting at the right speed and the right distance from their stars. But that's not cumulative selection. That's one-off, single-generation selection. It's like one generation of biological selection. It's like finches who have the wrong size of beak for a hard winter. The ones with the wrong size of beak die, so in the following winter, the next generation, they've all got the other size of beak. That's one generation. What's really crucial about biological evolution is that doesn't stop at one generation. It goes on to the next and the next and the next, and it takes hundreds, it takes thousands of generations to build up, cumulatively, the sort of really impressive adaptive complexity that we get in living things, in things like eyes and elbow joints. So that's the reason why solar systems don't look very impressively designed, whereas living bodies look very, very impressively designed indeed, because they've been through many generations of cumulative selection.
I was listening to your previous interview, and a question popped into my mind that I wanted to ask, and it's kind of a hot-button question. They asked you a question about children being gullible, and you explained that this is an adaptive mechanism, that they have a lot to learn when they're young, and so they'll take in a lot of information. Some of the information is good, some of the information is bad, and the problem is once they take in this information, it's pretty well set for the rest of their life. Is this might be one of the reasons explaining why religion and belief in supernatural forces is so ingrained in people, because it's indoctrinated to them when they're very young and very gullible, and even when they get older and they can start reasoning better, it's been so ingrained in them that they can't get out of it?
Yes, I do think that. It would be inconsistent with that view is the fact that, really rather remarkably, if people are religious, the religion that they have is almost always the same as that of their parents. Very occasionally it isn't. And this is an almost unique feature about people's beliefs. We talk about a child as being, say, a 4-year-old Muslim or a 4-year-old Catholic. You would never dream of talking about a 4-year-old economic monetarist or a 4-year-old neo-isolationist. And yet you can see the parallel.
Yes.
Children really ought not to be spoken of as a Catholic child or a Muslim child. They ought to be allowed to grow until they're old enough to decide for themselves what their beliefs about the cosmos are. But I think that the fact that we do treat it in that way, and the fact that parents seem to be regarded as having a unique right to impose their religious beliefs on their child, whereas nobody thinks they're going to impose their beliefs about, I don't know, why the dinosaurs went extinct or something of that sort. But religion is different. And I do think that you can explain an awful lot about religion if you assume that children start out gullible. Anything that's told them with sufficient force, particularly if it's reinforced by some kind of threats, like if you don't believe this, you'll go to hell when you die, then it is going to get passed on to the next generation. Above all, you must believe this, and when you grow up, you must teach your children the same thing. That, of course, is precisely how religions do get promoted, how they do get passed on from generation to generation.
So that's almost a Darwinian thing
Yes.
in evolution. Last question. Last night I brought this up in the question and answer period, and that is I saw the program and I read about you, and then they had a little squib in the program, somebody opposing you. And I was kind of taken back to that. And I talked to one of the people from the science group afterwards, and I says, do you normally do this in a program that you put out? And he said, well, yes. And then he thought back and says, well, no, we actually never have done that before. And, of course, the argument, as you pointed out in your answer to me, was essentially a religious argument against what you had said. And obviously, what you're talking about is very controversial because some people who are religious feel it's attacking their very basic beliefs. And yet, I wonder if you might have a comment on, here's a science group that, for some reason, feels so pressured by religions or something that they'll do an extraordinary thing by putting a religious argument in a program, something they've never done before. How do you react to that? I
think you're overreacting to this particular thing. I think that when somebody is trying to sell tickets for something, it's quite good to put in some negative, and I don't blame them for that at all. The particular extract that was put in was not by any known person. It was just a letter to the editor of a journal in which I'd had an article published. I mean, the person who wrote is not somebody I've ever heard of. It was not a refereed article. It was just that if you say anything in the press that remotely treads on people's religious toes, all hell breaks loose. I mean, you always get a great mailbag full of stuff. Now, I just throw it straight in the bin. But newspapers obviously have a duty to publish some random selection of the papers that they get in. And I think that's what happened in this case.
Finally, are the concepts...
Just representing, it's 8 minutes, so Dr. Dawkins can stay as long as he wants, but we promise to intervene at 5.
I just have this one last question, and that's it. Are the concepts do you see the concepts of evolution as a sort of an atheistic explanation of the origins of life? And is that why the religious have so much problems with it, because it undermines their
basic foundations?
Well, evolutionists differ about this because there are a large number of evolutionists who are also religious. You cannot be both sane and well educated and disbelieve in evolution. The evidence is so strong that any sane, educated person has got to believe in evolution. Now, there are plenty of sane, educated religious people. There are professors of theology and there are bishops and people. And so obviously they all believe in evolution. Otherwise they wouldn't have got where they have, because they'd be too stupid or too ignorant. So it is a fact that there are evolutionists who are religious. There are religious people who are evolutionists. My own personal feeling is that it is rather difficult. I find it that the reason why I am no longer religious is that the argument from design has been undermined by evolution. So if the basis for your religion is the argument from design, if the reason why you're religious is that you look at the world and you say, isn't it beautifully designed, isn't it elegant, isn't it complicated, then Darwinism really does pull the rug out from under that argument. But if your reason for being religious is nothing to do with that, if your reason for being religious is some still small voice inside you which utterly convinces you, then the argument from design, I suppose, has no bearing upon that. But what I think Darwinism has done is utterly to destroy the argument from design, which I believe is probably, historically, the dominant reason for believing in a supernatural being.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.